Hello everyone, welcome to this Power Maths webinar. Thanks for attending and making time for this on Friday afternoon. My name's Simon Holden-White. I'm a Senior Product Manager in the Primary Maths team at Pearson, and I'm responsible for the Power Maths content and resources. And I'm joined by Josh Lurie and Tony Staniff as well, who are our authors and series editors for Power Maths. Now, we are doing a recording of this session, so you'll be able to go back over it afterwards. We'll send that as soon as we can once we've been able to add the captions, so we'll be able to send that round next week. And you can also download the slides that we're showing from the homepage as well. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking through the resources for autumn 2020 as part of our response to the pandemic. So I'm going to be talking about what content is different for autumn 2020 in Power Maths. And then we're going to have a session where Tony and Josh are going to talk about the major challenges that teachers are facing and give some advice on how you can handle those. And then there'll be some time for you to ask questions as well. So that first section then on resources for this September. So I'm going to talk about what's new, what we're adding in terms of resources for Power Maths. And the purpose of what we're doing really is to identify gaps, to help teachers identify gaps that children may have in their learning, to find follow-up activities and learning that they can use, and also to support any children learning from home if that's still a live issue. And everything that I'm talking about that we're going to be adding will be added by the end of August. So it will be ready for the start of September. Now, today we're making suggestions, and in terms of the resources we're adding, we're trying to give you as teachers the flexibility you need, because we know the situation has been changing quite quickly. It's quite unpredictable. And also, in line with recent announcements, you may have, in different schools, different approaches to how you organise your curriculum and different things that you do this autumn. So accounting for that, we hope you'll be able to use these suggestions to really plan the course that's right for your school this autumn term. Here's a quick summary then. I'm going to talk through what's new in Power Maths for this autumn, but also there are things at the bottom of this slide which are already available and published, which I'm going to talk about as well briefly because we think they serve a role to help you this autumn with the challenges that you face. I'm going to just talk through what's on this slide quickly, and then I'll revisit each bit. So just to explain what each of these things is. To begin with, children will be able to log in to the Active Learn platform in September and see resources that you have allocated to them as the teacher. And I should point out that this is something that ordinarily would be available as an extra purchase, and we've decided as part of our COVID support to make it free to teachers this term. So it will be free for the autumn term and so until December. Next, we're producing some video lessons to help in that situation, particularly where children are working at home. And you'll be familiar with the end of unit checks from the textbook. And what we're doing there is we're collating those into a file for each year group to help you with ongoing assessment and potentially assessment at the beginning of the year as well. And we've got a few different types of charts that I'll talk to you about. So there's a chart where you can look at the prerequisite for each unit in Power Maths. That should be valuable in finding resources to help you with pre-teaching and follow-up as needed. And looking at it the other way round, for topics in the summer term that you may not have taught in the way that you wanted to, or maybe haven't been able to teach them at all, you'll be able to look up those topics and see where they crop up again in the Power Maths progression in the year up, so you can plan ahead for those topics. You might be aware that White Rose Maths have produced or are producing special plans, schemes of learning for the 2021 academic year, accounting for the disruption and the different situation that schools are in. So those White Rose plans for the coming term and year will be a sequence of lessons that includes recap lessons, so content from the year before. We are matching our Power Maths lessons to those White Rose schemes of learning. So if you're planning to use those White Rose plans, that will give you a route through Power Maths, which you might want to use. And lastly, in this What's New section, it's exciting to be able to talk about Maths Flex. So this is a digital platform for pupil practice, which is driven by AI technology. I'll talk a bit more about it, just a little bit more about it, but the key thing to know is that you can sign up for a 6-week trial in the autumn. Then looking at things that I've said don't forget about, because they're available already, you might know about them, but just in case you don't, I'm going to talk about these as well. Firstly, the progress tests for assessment. Are you aware of those? I'll tell you a bit about them. And the power-ups. Sometimes we find that teachers don't notice these starter activities, which are there for each Power Maths lesson. And you may also not know that there's a progression for the power-up activities in each year group. Then we've got our summer home editions, which are books that we published for this summer term in partnership with White Rose Maths. But those should have a really valuable role as well in the autumn. I just paused while I lost my view of the screen, so I'm hoping that you can still hear me okay. I've just opened up the window okay, and I can see the clock ticking, so hopefully you can hear me and we're all okay. So where I got to, I was just talking about the summer home editions, and the last thing on this slide, Pinpoint resources. Now this is something else which is outside of Power Maths, but could be particularly valuable to you in the autumn term with the challenges you face. So I'm going to tell you about our Pinpoint resources as well. Now, an overall piece of advice that we'll be giving is to start in the autumn term with the autumn term content. We think that is better than, for instance, trying to go over everything from the summer term that you may not have taught as you wanted. So if you're following the Power Maths units in the autumn term, or just to pick up on the other box on the left-hand side there, if you're following the White Rose scheme, but using the Power Maths lessons that match the White Rose scheme. So if you're following the Power Maths units anyway, you can use the prerequisite for each unit to go back and look. For instance, if you're starting year 5 with the place value unit, the prerequisite unit, let's say an obvious example, will be the year 4 place value unit. So you could use the end of unit check from the year 4 place value unit to help you see how confident children are with that learning. And then in terms of what you can do next, if you can see that they're not as confident or as secure with that as you would like, you can use the strengthen activity from the year 4 place value unit, and you can use textbook pages from the year 4 place value unit as well, whether that is for targeted follow-up or whether that is for pre-teaching as you prepare to move into that year 5 place value unit. Do you know about the strengthen activities? Do you know where those are? So if you go into any unit in Power Maths in Active Learn, you will see a strengthen activity in that unit that you can launch. And that is for children whose understanding is not as robust as you would like it to be, to do some follow-up work. So that is a little bit on helping to fill gaps as you move through the Power Maths units. And next, I'm just going to move on to what you could potentially do at the start of the year, because a lot of teachers have said to us, how can we baseline at the beginning of the year to understand children's strengths and weaknesses? The obvious thing in Power Maths are the progress tests. Now, these are photocopiable books. They're not in the subscription, but they're the obvious thing that you could use in that scenario. So there are half-termly tests within the progress test, but there's also an end-of-year test for each year. So, for instance, again, if you're in year 5, you could be using the end-of-year test from year 4 to get a good picture of strengths and weaknesses that children have as you start year 5. And that comes with a very detailed diagnostic mark scheme to help you pick up on misconceptions children have, etc. And the other thing, which maybe is something slightly softer, is using those collated files of the end of unit checks. So you could be giving children at the beginning of year 5 end of unit checks from year 4 to work through, and then you'll be able to see which units did they have a strong understanding of, which ones less so. So that's kind of the left-hand side of this slide. The right-hand side of the slide is the same as the last one. So again, once you've done that assessment, you can find strength and activities from the units that you're identifying, and you can use the textbook pages as well. So that is how you can assess ongoingly and how you can assess at the beginning of the year using Power Maths materials. But something else that you might want to consider is how you can provide extra practice of key topics at the beginning of the year or as you're working through the year. So in other words, as well as things that you've identified as particular gaps that children have, there'll be things that you know that they need to do more practice at and you can predict. So some of the Power Maths materials here are going to help you with that. I picked out the power-ups for 2 reasons, really. As I say, firstly, because some teachers don't notice that they're there, but also because the power-ups are number fluency activities that you can use as starters in each Power Maths lesson. And number fluency is an area we think is going to be a challenge and something where children are going to need to do lots of work. So the power-ups will be really valuable, particularly if you've been underusing the power-ups up to this point. You could use them as a bank of activities for number fluency, but certainly because there's one for every day, you can use them for ongoing number fluency. Now, the images in the bottom left of this slide, if you look at the Discover page there with the truck on it, can you see I've done a red circle around the hotspot where you launch the power-up? So I've done that just for anybody who actually wasn't sure where the power-ups are. Okay, but the other thing is that some teachers might not be aware that we have a progression of the power-ups in each year group. So the useful thing about that is that you can look up a power-up activity for a topic that you want to practice, for a particular number topic. So to find the progressions of the power-ups, if you're not sure, they are on the planning guidance page in Power Maths. So if you log into Power Maths and click the planning tile, you will land on the planning guidance tab of that page. So instead of going into the year 2 plan, for instance, if you stay on the planning guidance for all year groups and scroll down past the curriculum charts and that kind of thing that's on that page, the power-ups are at the bottom of that page. Okay, then there are the summer home editions. And as I was saying, these are books that we created in partnership with White Rose Maths for this summer term. And the idea was that many schools might find it helpful to practice and consolidate key learning from each year group throughout the summer term, rather than trying to teach all the summer term topics. Now, some of you, I'm sure, will have been doing that and others not. But these books are available as ebooks, and they're also available as books to buy. And we can send a link to where you can find those afterwards. But those books are going to be particularly useful. If you haven't been using them at all, you could be using these books for catch-up in the autumn term, catch-up and keep-up. Because if you're in year 5, the year 4 book is practicing and consolidating the key learning that we think children really needed to be working on ahead of starting year 5. So it will be useful in that way, and probably useful whether you've been using them up to this point or not. So that's the summer home editions. And the other things on this slide are Maths Flex and Pinpoint, which are going to help you with practice and catch up. But I'm going to talk about them in a moment as things which are outside of Power Maths. So I'm going to finish off talking about the other things we're offering within Power Maths. So I mentioned that we would be allowing you to allocate resources to pupils. They'll be able to log in and see the resources that you've sent them. You would be allocating those resources from the resources menu. So the resources page in Power Maths, you can tick a resource and then click the allocate button. And the resources you'd be able to allocate would be e-textbooks, which we know will be useful, teaching tools, which we've been asked for pupil versions of those often, but could be particularly useful in the autumn term if you have any concerns about sharing concrete materials in the class, for instance. Other materials you'll be able to allocate the power-ups, strengthen activities, deepen activities, and also the videos. It'll probably be useful at the beginning of September if I do a demo, perhaps another webinar or a video, just showing how you add the pupils, how you allocate something to a child, where they log in and so on, just to show you the journey. So I'll do that, but rest assured it's not too complicated. And next, I want to show you lesson videos, which we are adding for September. Now, these are not class footage. These are a teacher talking through the textbook pages, so a child could be looking at the lesson at home. And the child will be able to pause the video. The child will be prompted to pause the video, have a think about the learning that's being introduced, answer some of the questions, for instance, and then unpause and continue. So we're going to do it for some lessons just to give a bit of structure and hopefully to inspire parents and children at home to see how a lesson remotely can just come to life and how you can bring a lesson to life using the textbook, even if you're at home. And I have shown on there a link to the BBC website because we produced some videos exactly like this, which Josh worked on for BBC Bite Size. So that is an example there of what these videos would look like. And what we really have managed to do, which we're proud of with those videos, is show the resources coming to life. Now, I said I would tell you briefly about the progress tests. As I say, these are photocopiable books that you can get of tests where you can assess children, diagnose issues, and track their progress. So very briefly with the progress test, as I said, there's an end of year test and there are half-termly tests going through. So as you work with Power Maths, you can always be assessing children on what they've actually been learning. And there's an arithmetic and a reasoning test each half term, and a diagnostic mark scheme, as I've been saying. Now, those are outside of the Power Maths subscription, but the online mark book is something that you all have as part of a regular Power Maths subscription. And the online mark book is for using with the progress test. So that helps you to track children's progress against age-related expectations. And you can probably see, just about anyway, from the screenshot, you can see the color bands there going from red, below expectations, through to dark blue, greater depth. I know you can't read it, but that is our Pearson 6-step scale, which is hard to say, but which we use to help you track children's progress against age-related expectations with a few different steps on the scale so you can keep a close eye. So those are the progress tests, and I've talked about where those might fit in for you this autumn. Very briefly, Maths Flex, you can sign up for a free 6-week trial in September. So why not do that? As I say, it uses AI technology to give children targeted practice, which is the appropriate level for them. So it can move backwards through prerequisite work if you need an intervention, and it can give children stretch within the same area. So particularly valuable in this scenario where you're dealing with a widespread of prior attainment and you want to be able to give appropriate work to children and be able to provide stretch and so on, particularly as the teacher doesn't have to do any admin and because it fits with Power Maths. So it's very convenient and there's nothing to lose with taking a 6-week trial and just seeing how that helps you with the situation in September. And finally, here, I'm going to tell you about Pinpoint materials. Now, these again are outside of Power Maths, but the reason that I'm telling you about them is they really fit into this situation, I think. So they're external and they're print materials that you can buy. There are 3 main products within Pinpoint Maths. So first of all, times tables. There's a teacher times tables book, which is a big bank of 10-minute activities that you can use for really teaching times tables. So for instance, helping children to pick up the patterns between the tables and understand them really well. And then we've got our times tables detectives books, which are workbooks for the children. And these, as well as giving secure recall of the times tables facts, they give children opportunities to apply their times tables knowledge in mathematical reasoning and problem solving. So given that times tables is likely to be an area where children aren't quite where you'd like them to be in the autumn term, and you'd love it if they had their times tables really secure when you're moving through the Power Maths units, this is something that you could put alongside to help make that happen. And secondly, the problem solving and reasoning challenge cards in Pinpoint Maths. Again, these help with a particular issue that you're likely to face in the autumn because there's likely to be a widespread of attainment with some children having done more work than others over the last term and so on. And what these challenge cards allow you to do, you can keep some of the children in the class busy with deep, challenging problems which are linked to the objective that you're trying to teach and which are low threshold but really high ceiling and have real stretch. So you can keep children busy with appropriate challenging problems whilst you perhaps do some extra work with the children who need to get the learning in the lesson more secure. So there's that real practical side to these which will help. And the word problems in Pinpoint Maths, these are photocopy books. And it's a big bank of word problems for all year groups, all objectives, lots of problems. And you could use them for practice. The low reading demand would be very useful, I think. And the differentiation, the 3 levels of difficulty that we've got on each page and for each objective, you can use those for practice, but you can also use them for assessment. You can use them, for instance, as a cold task. So a couple of weeks after you've taught something, it's easy to find word problems for the objective you've been teaching and see if they still understand it as well as you were hoping. So that was really, really quick on Pinpoint Maths. And if you want to find out more, the best thing would be to go to Amazon and look up any of those Pinpoint products and look at the sample pages, and you can see whether that's going to help you this autumn. Now, just before we move on, I'm going to flick back up through my slides, and I'm just going to show you for a second the quick summary that I showed at the beginning. So this is what I've been talking through up to this point. I showed you what's new for the autumn and things that you may or may not be aware of that will be helpful, that are already available. And now we're going to move on to the next section of this webinar. So I'm just moving forward now to my slide for advice from the experts. Here on the slide are some of the big challenges that we think you're going to be facing in the autumn. And now I'm going to hand over to Josh, who is going to give you some top tips on these issues and more issues as well.
Thanks, Simon. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Josh Lurie. I was lead author and did some series editing for Power Maths for Key Stage 1 and for Key Stage 2. I taught for many years in primary schools. I'm just scanning down just before I start some of the questions that are appearing at the bottom. I've seen there are quite a few questions, and there were last time as well, on the topic of mixed age. I'll save that to the end. I know that that's quite a thorny area. I'm based down here in Cornwall, and I'm near 3 primary schools near where I'm based, and all of them have mixed age, and 2 out of those 3 primary schools have 4 year groups in a class. It is a thing we've been working on. So I'll mention that at the end. I'm also aware that a lot of the people on here will have varying levels of experience with using Power Maths. Some of you will have just started. Some of you have been using it for a couple of years. Hopefully there's bits for both sets of people. Not all of it will be perfect for everybody, but we'll work with what we can. Other things that I'm going to try and cover are some general advice about using Power Maths and about how we've written it. Also, some of these sort of key post-lockdown issues, particularly around what do we do about the summer content? Do we teach year 3 to year 3, or do we teach the end of year 2 to year 3, and so on and so on? This idea of assessing at the start of the year where children are. I'm going to talk a little bit about things that hopefully are relevant around some guidance that seems to be coming from the government about how they've got to be seated, and no group work, sharing resources and so on, where there might be some difficulties around that. I will just say that I think, I'm going to turn my camera on as well. Hello, this is me, everybody should be able to see me now. I will just say I've never taught in a post-lockdown situation before. So a lot of what I'm going to say is just thinking around what would I do in this situation. I don't have any experience of having done this. I don't think any of us do. I do have experience of teaching classes where there's a wide range of ability. In fact, every class I've taught, it felt like that. And I imagine that all of you feel the same. So some of what we're going to experience, I think, will be in that area, but maybe just even more exacerbated based on what we've got. Anyway, I'm going to move through now. So I've called this the anatomy of a lesson. I'm going to start with looking at the individual parts of lessons in particular. Hopefully there'll be some relevant things in there. Then after that, I'm going to look at a unit of work in Power Maths and start to think about, okay, that bigger picture thinking, what adaptations can we make around there? I was going to start with the Discover task that's at the start of each of our lessons. I'm sure you're familiar with these. So I've got an example of one here. Pluck this from Key Stage 1. When we originally wrote these, I think one of the ideas was that these would be used to harness curiosity from the children. And for this reason, I've taken this Discover task and I've stripped away the actual questions. And for now, the first thing I'd want the children to do, and I'd say to the children, would be just tell the story, what's going on here. Even down to he's gone to a sweet shop. Oh, what's going on? He wants to buy some chocolate, and I like chocolate, you like chocolate, and all of the different things. Just tell the story and orient themselves in the picture, find it interesting. Next one, well, what does it make you think about? Has it reminded you of anything? Have you started to have any questions? Have you started to ponder anything? Then I might say, well, what could the questions be? Inevitably, you'll get some questions that aren't maths-based, but try and guide them towards the maths. Now, originally, the idea would be, the teacher would say, well, actually, the question we're going to focus on today is this. And I think at this stage, you've got a decision. Sometimes you could then say, well, here's the question we're going to work on, and it could be 1A, and then send the children away in groups to talk about it, work on it, and so on. That's looking like it might be a little bit more difficult in the situation that's coming up. So the other option is just to take some discussion, lead some discussion with the class, and at that stage, you'll say, look, can anyone see the numbers we might be having to work with here? And then pick out the numbers and then say, well, this is the operation we're going to look at, and then work through in a bit more directed. It gives you the option to work flexibly like that, Discover. So here's another Discover task. In this one, I've stripped away some of the information. So again, we can tell the story. What does it make you think about? This context was taken from, I think, an artist who's famous for making dot paintings, and the student artist would paint the dots in different patterns. So this is taken from a real life context. This could be quite creatively done. You could do this with many bits of artwork in class. What could the questions be? What do they notice about the structure of the pictures? Hopefully this is a year 6. This is actually from a percentages unit in year 6. The original question on there that we were going to focus on was that Mr. Jones says paint 50% of the circles blue, 25% yellow, or the other way. I can't remember which way around it is. However, the idea would be that gradually, by going through these questions, we orient the children into that, and we can lead some of this thinking and some of this questioning by stripping some of the information away and guiding us there. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this here is generalized advice about using Power Maths, but some teachers have expressed some concern about, there's a lot of talk around, well, we need to assess them at the start of the year. But then some other teachers are concerned about, well, if we assess the children in quite a formal way, they're going to be into this that's not good for self-esteem, and also that it's going to make them feel like, oh, I'm back in school, I'm being tested, maths is all about right and wrong answers. Whereas if we use these to orient the children and to listen to discussion and to bring out ideas, then perhaps this is quite a good opportunity, even in these Discover tasks, to do some really informal assessment, but just to get a sense of where they are, but also to put forward the sort of the sense that maths is interesting, it's curious, it's got applications to real life. I'm going to go on to the next one now. This one I think I've taken from year 3. Look at what's going on. So tell the story works really nicely here. You can say, oh, they've fallen out, they've fallen on the ground. What does this remind you of? Oh, I knocked all over, things over when I was having dinner. I got in loads of trouble. What could the questions be? And we start to say, well, this is where we guide them towards the maths. And I think this is quite a good stage with the pupils to start to get them to think, well, it's to start to be able to assess where their mathematical thinking is at the time. And then if we want, we can guide them. Well, today we're going to focus on the question, and this is from the lesson Counting in Hundreds. All of those, so the pictures are supposed to be to engage curiosity. This one I was looking at, if in an ideal world, I'd probably walk into the room carrying a tray of things, and then in a over theatrical way, drop them and spill them and say, oh no, and act it out, and then get the children to play along with that bit of theatre, and then say, can we count them all together? That might not be open to us at the moment, depending on how sharing resources is going. But we can still tell the story. So the pictures are there to engage that curiosity. This is another one that we read. This is the last one of these Discover tasks that we're going to look at in detail like this. So again, tell the story. Oh, they're doing an obstacle course. It's like when I went to soft play, and soft play's not open anymore. Have all those discussions. And then say, well, what does it make you think about? And then we could have those real life discussions, but also let's look at the maths. So it makes me think of shapes, and what we can have some discussion around shapes. So at that stage, be quite a good opportunity to be able to assess what they know about the shapes, shape names, and so on and so on. What could the maths questions be? Now, actually, this comes from a lesson on recognizing symmetrical patterns. Ideally, when we wrote this one, this would be something that the teacher would look at the Power Maths textbook and say, oh, well, that's very nice on the screen, but actually, let's go into the hall and we'll do this as an obstacle course. So maybe there's an opportunity for some of them. They could be taken outdoors. I know that classes are going to be in bubbles, but there might still be opportunities to look at each one and see, oh, this could be a good bit where I take them to a different part of the school, just to make it feel, the school feel like, them back as it's a rich environment and we're enjoying it. Now, so that's just some advice around potentially using the Discover task to do some of that informal assessment to get a sense of where their maths ideas are post-lockdown. I was going to now look at the steps through one individual lesson. I've taken it from year 3. The reason I've taken it from year 3 is because that's in the middle. We'll just have a look at this one. And I've left the questions in there for this one. I'll just let you have a look at the Discover task for a moment. So again, I'll do that, tell the story. Oh, they've gone to the museum, that's the dinosaur. Oh, look, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. It's nearly 11 now. You can have all those discussions. Just orient into the picture in that loose sense, and then there's 245, or some of them might say there's 24/5 visitors in the museum, and then you've got some assessment around their understanding of place value, and so on and so on. The question happens to be here, when these people go in, how many people will be in the museum in total? Now, in terms of they're coming back, what do we want them to be able to do in this lesson? Now, I would say the number one piece of advice that I've got about any Power Maths lesson, this goes back to also working with mixed age schools, is that each Power Maths lesson, really, there's one core sort of golden nugget, one tiny golden nugget that is the center of each lesson. And if, as a teacher, you can scan through and you can find those, then actually that does inform how we can make a journey through this, particularly where we're supporting children who've got gaps. In this situation, the question ends up being 245, and then there are 4 more people. So the work I might want the class to do at that stage, and then I will demonstrate what we're going to do to solve it, would be, well, there's 245 and there's 4. What are we going to do with those 2 numbers? And then the pupil's thinking becomes, oh, I've got to choose the operation that solves this problem. And in this situation, if we look at here's the share screen, the operation is an add. And the work that I might want the pupils to do at that stage, the thinking, is to choose the operation rather than do the number. I'll support with the number work. I'll demonstrate the number work. Or, it depends on how confident they are with the different things. So there's an option there where rather than making them do the actual calculation, the work I get them to do here is to get to choose the operation. Most of the Discover tasks lend themselves to that approach, I would say. I've got the share page here, which shows two different ways of solving that problem. I think necessarily with how we've had to design them, sometimes the share page can seem quite busy. So one thing that we might need to do is just break down the simple stages. So as a teacher, what I'm doing now is I'm trying to find out what it is. So now I've simplified the page a little bit. I'm looking, and I've got one method. Dexter's method there is counting on. So counting on in ones, and we can see that works. Dexter's advice there is, well, it works, but it's easy to make a mistake. And if we say to the children 17 at 5, you know the where you go 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and then that counting on has that in there, and also we might miss out a number, and it's not very applicable to larger numbers. And then we've got Sparks' solution here, which is to say, well, look, I've represented it like this, but actually I could count the ones, but actually I'm going to use my number bonds to solve this. Now, I would say that simple bit there is the core of this lesson. The lesson objective is adding a 3-digit number in ones, but I don't think that's the core of what we're learning. The core of what we're learning today is I can use my number bond to add the ones. And so I've got number bond knowledge, and that's what I'm going to apply. The reason I'm going to mention number bonds in this lesson in particular is because lockdown or no lockdown, the number one reason teachers say that their children are struggling to access the lessons is not the content, the reason they're talking about the lesson, but often it's number work. It's the fluency. Do they know their number bonds to within 10? Do they know number bonds across that 10 bridge? Do they know the time balls? And it's there that it starts to fall apart. So this is the dream, that the parent picks the child up from school, says, well, what did you learn today? And instead of just shrugging their shoulders and say, I don't know, they say, oh, I learned I should use my number bonds to add the ones. Now, that core of the lesson, if as a teacher I can look at that and I'm really clear about what that core of that lesson is, and then if the pupil can be really clear about what the core of that lesson is, that's going to help me when I'm trying to simplify. Oh, maybe there's quite a lot of content that I haven't covered last year and I need to check what we can. So if I'm really clear what that core is, and I'm really clear how it fits into the sequence of lessons that I'm teaching, then hopefully that can help me navigate this sort of post-lockdown situation that we're going to look at. So I'll go here. So here's the share, and what I'm wanting them to do is to be able to identify that the core is that I'm going to use my number bonds. I'll quickly take you through the rest of this lesson. So here's think together 1, think together 2. At this stage, this is where they're practicing, and so here they have to see, oh, I'm doing this is again, I might get them to choose the operation, strip some of this away. So now it's still about the ones, but in this case, they have to subtract. But again, the core is I want them to be able to use their number bonds to be able to answer this. So it's 319 subtract 7, and the number bond I want them to be able to use is 9 subtract 7. This one here, 291, the number bond is 1 plus 6 that I want them to be able to use and identify. So in my head as a teacher, I've constantly got that right. This is the core of what I want them to learn today. Think together 3 and think together 4. One other thing I'm going to mention is that there might be, given how desks are set up and classes are set up, we might be more in a situation of I teach a bit, you do a bit. I teach a bit, you do a bit. We discuss all together, you do a bit. So I would suggest that maybe there's an opportunity between 1 and 2 to get them to do some more practice. Then I might get them to do think together 3. This is a really nice activity that's designed to really dig into that core of, right, okay, well, it's about number bonds, and some of this is about inverse operations here. And if I really understand how the number bonds fit together, then this activity will really show it. So I might use that as the assessment around what are they really getting? What's holding them back? Do they understand what they've got to do, but they can't do their number bonds? Or are they at a loss because they don't know inverse operations? So that question. And then I might pause there, get them to do some more independent work before finally coming back to this challenge question at the end. Actually, even as a rule of thumb, I think I'd often save the challenge question for the plenary of the lesson, because the challenge is the bit that really digs down deeper and deeper and deeper into that one core nugget of what the lesson is about. I would say that because we've got, if I just go back, so this flow of the lesson might be, so now it looks like children might not be working in groups so much. So we'll do a bit as a whole class, question answer. Now you do a bit of independent work. So I might have made another couple of questions that use that same number bond. and so on and so on. Question 3 might be something really good for me to really drill down into that assessment for learning of what they do and they don't know. And then I'd save the challenge for the end, or I might save the challenge for the discussion at the start of the next lesson, depending on how I want to work it. Now, that's an individual lesson and a couple of bits of thoughts I've had around what we might be able to do post-lockdown. Next, I'm going to move on briefly to this bigger picture thinking. So again, I've picked year 3. Here is the yearly overview for year 3. I'm going to look. Every year group pretty much follows this. Textbook A is place value. Then we're looking at addition and subtraction, then multiplication and division. I think that's fair. Sometimes we've got sort of a little measure unit fitted in here. Often that's just because of number of lessons, number of weeks. However, we've got this flow that always goes on there. We were aware when we wrote it that if a school picks up Power Maths, then some of the children are going to be in year 4 and using Power Maths for the first time in year 4. So we needed to make, let's say, year 4 accessible to children who hadn't worked on the year 3 stuff the year before because it didn't exist. So some of that is in there, and some of the thinking around, well, it should hopefully be accessible with some help from the teacher and thinking from the teacher. Year 3, starting in with the autumn term of year 3, is there a way that we can do that rather than having to backfill and go over year 2 stuff? Is there a way we can look at the year 3 content and then do some pre-teaching and sort of teaching around that? So this section's about that. I'm just going to move on. So if I look at this first, place value within 1,000, I'll just talk through some of the thoughts I might have as a teacher when I'm looking at that unit. First thing I'm going to do is go and look at each individual lesson. So there are 11 lessons in this unit, which is not a very helpful number when I'm thinking of planning out weeks. My first thought is, well, do I make that 2 weeks or do I stretch it out to 3 weeks? My thinking might be, or actually, if I stretch it out to 3 weeks, I might get 4 extra days of being able to consolidate some other things. Or it might be that if I look at each of these lessons, I decide, well, those 2 lessons, the cores of those 2 lessons are so similar that I can condense those, letting me move on to other things that we need to. Anyway, so you can make those decisions as we look through. And I'll come back to the idea of it's always helpful to look at each lesson and think, what is that core? If I can say it in just one pithy sentence that's what I learned today, then can I go through these? So I've got counting in hundreds, representing numbers, number line to 1,000, work through those. Just as a teacher, get a sense of the progression in my head, look at these lessons. That last lesson in the unit, counting in 50s, the core of that doesn't seem to necessarily flow. It's an objective they need to cover, but is that something that I could chop out and use as some fluency that we'll do bit by bit, or later on if I want to do some spiral stuff and come back to it? Do I save that for later? So I could maybe use that as an option to condense it down. These are my thoughts. So I'm thinking about Unit 1. Given the situation, do I expand it to 3 weeks because maybe they need a bit more time on this early place value stuff? That might be an option post-lockdown. Or am I thinking, actually, they've done place value in year 1 and year 2, and they've built that. Maybe this is something I can narrow down or do bits and pieces throughout the year. The reason being, I'm going to look at these next 2 Unit 2 and Unit 3, and think, well, what are the obstacles here? So the lesson we looked at was one of the lessons in the addition and subtraction unit. I'm going to move. My first port of call would be to suggest that for the class that I receive, probably one of the main obstacles is going to be fluency, and specifically number bonds. There could well be other factors, and not for every pupil, but one of the main things is that the numbers come up, the calculations come up, and you get that maths anxiety for some pupils. And then once the number bonds have fallen away, you're not going to get the answers right. You're not going to have confidence in it. You get this sort of vicious circle. So having looked at that, I'd think, okay, well, I've got 11 lessons here. What can I do in this time that's going to prepare for success later on? So let's talk around pre-teaching. Pre-teaching tends to be the day of or the day before. I'm wondering, in this post-lockdown, do we think broader and think, okay, well, maybe I'm going to do some whole class pre-teaching subtly, getting them ready for this when I get to this stage here. So I'll use fluency as the example, and I know that that's where I would be thinking from my experience of teaching in the past would be that that's where my first thoughts would be going. So I'm going to look at fluency. I'll go back to this Think Together page from the lesson we were looking at before. For this page, I've looked closely at it and I've decided, well, the core of this lesson is that I want them to be able to use their number bonds. So if the number bonds are going to be a block, maybe I just provide them with the number bonds. And in this area, I've done it as a part-whole model here, but it could have been a bar model. It could have just been the calculation. It could have been a diagram. And now their thinking is, well, they've just got to find the correct number bond that's going to help solve that problem. So in some way, I'm still getting them to use their number bonds, and they've got to identify which one's useful for this particular question, and they've got to identify how that fits into that part-whole model representation there. I could present it like this and give them, well, these are the number bonds for the first question. I could narrow it down to help pupils with a bit of clarity there. The two I've chosen as a teacher, the two I've chosen to present for question 2 are sort of both plausible because they've both got a 1 and a 6. So maybe the level of challenge I've put in there comes down to me selecting those 2 examples really carefully. I could have presented them like this, where I give them some of the information, but I'm still nudging them towards what they need, but actually they're going to do a bit more of the number work. Having done some of these questions, I mentioned before that this now, given that we've got children not working in groups so much, maybe let's all do think together. 1, great, you've done that. Here are the number bonds we're looking at. Now let's do some more questions, a bit like number 1. Which number bond can we use to solve these? What do you notice? So I might break it down and get them to do these 3 independently. Which number bonds are you going to use? You choose those, really with a sense that fluency is the thing I'm going to really be working on. Another set here, right? And these are to do with the other ones. Let's pause now. I've done think together 2. Let's come back to this and do some information, do some extra work on the fluency there. So I'm thinking that is what can happen during the teaching of Unit 2 in that particular lesson we were looking at. But actually, maybe I can do some of that work also in the 3 weeks preceding. So I know which number bonds are going to be needed for different lessons. Maybe in this place value unit, I could spread it out into 3 weeks so that I can do some work around these specific number bonds so that they've seen them and they've learned them. So I was playing with this idea and thinking, well, what might I do in those 3 weeks that's going to just top up that fluency? And I was thinking, right, okay, well, these are the number bonds to 9. Let's have a look. Well, I can do 9 is 4 and 5. That's a dice fact because I can get 4 and a 5 on a dice. I could score 9 with 2 dice. I could score 9 with 2 dice of 3 and 6. That's another dice fact there. And then these 2 other facts, well, not quite. I can't use 2 dice for those. So in fact, I'm gonna work with the children. Let's have. I've got for the number 9. I've got 2 dice facts, and I've got 3 dice facts. So 2 of them use 2 dice, 3 of them use 3 dice, and that's just me thinking. In the preceding 3 weeks, I could have done some of this work, just a little bit here and there. And then do some work around. Can you remember the next day? Can you work out the missing dice? Can you think about what the missing dice would be? How are they related? This time I've jumbled up the part-whole models, and they've got to match them to the dice and work out the missing dice that should be there. I'm going to go thinking to a greater depth just to finish off. This is another question that often comes up is, what do I do with the children that in lockdown have been doing loads of work in lockdown? Their number bonds are really strong anyway. What can I do to keep them interested as well if I'm having to do a lot of this sort of slower teaching to really dig into those concepts? The first thing I nudge people towards is to have a look back at that Discover task. So this lesson we were looking at, we had the 1A, which was 245 add 4. Now 1B then says 1 person then leaves. And the calculation we've got is 245 add 4 and then take away 1. Now, as one question, that's fine, and maybe it's something up your sleeve that some others could be working on if they've finished a bit more quickly. But actually, very often in that 1B is hidden the seed of something that could be quite interesting. I could say, well, that's interesting. Look, add 4, take away 1. That worked out the same as add 3. Well, that's weird. Let's try. What about add 4, take away 3? What's that like? What about add 3, take away 4? Are they the same? Are they different? What's going on? Add 4, take away 5. What do we notice? And missing numbers here, and then I've used that 1B, that second Discover question, as a seed to try and I haven't taken them to new content, but we're looking at patterns and we're looking at, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's going to happen here. And from that seed, we've developed some sort of variation so we can start to think, oh, there's something to talk about here. And then if I want to really push at it, I could start to, well, look at this one I've invented. Have a go at this. try and invent some yourself. Well, look, I've put the numbers in a different. What's the same? What's different? This is the same numbers, the same answer? Started to miss out the number there, and so on and so on. So I'd say there are some things that you could do around in those situations. In terms of mixed age, I would say, just before I finish, that the work I've done with mixed age schools, there's quite a lot in this area. None of us, through the work and the research we've done, have decided on one way. There's one good way to teach mixed age. The main help we've found for teaching mixed age is if the teacher is feeling confident clearly about what they're trying to teach and has an awareness of progression through the curriculum. If they have that confidence and that clarity, then from there you make the choices around that lesson. It sounds like a fudged answer, but actually it comes down to being really, really clear about what it is that you're trying to teach, and then what are the next steps from there and how they join together. And so hopefully what Power Maths has got is you could look at that year 3, and then I could look at a similar lesson in year 4 and see, okay, well, if this is the core here, is there the same core in the year 4 lesson? And actually I'd say that for this particular lesson, there pretty much is. It just, I might be working with 4 digits, but the core is still the same. I was gonna finish there. So hopefully some of that was useful for some of you. Good luck, everybody. I think I'm going to pass back to Simon now, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh, for going through all that detail and giving all those tips. That's really helpful. We've got Tony Staneff on the call, who is our series editor, as I was saying. And Tony, do you have any tips of your own or anything to pick up on from what we've been talking about today?
Nothing specific. I think the presentation that yourself and Josh have done should have hopefully been helpful to schools with regards to what's going on. And as people are aware, it's going to be a bit of an unknown, the situation next year, and with things going on. And so I think we'll do our best to respond to the situation as things arise. And like we said previously, if there's things we can put out to help teachers teach, then we will do that. And the other thing I would say is that if people have got any particular concerns, they can always email yourself, and that often finds its way back to us. And they can email me or Josh direct as well, and we can try and help remotely. I appreciate it's a bit of an unknown, and I think we're going to try and showcase early on some examples of good practice that's going on to try and recap. But I think all the things that yourself and Josh have spoken about are all great ideas and things, and it's just every school's going to be different is the problem. Some schools, the children would have been doing home learn very successfully, or the majority will have, and whereas some schools children won't have. And I think every single class is different, every single child is different, and I think Power Maths has been designed to be used flexibly. And don't be frightened of using it, your teachers using it flexibly as well. Like Josh said, you don't have to cover everything. You can cover key ideas, key aspects. Okay, take a lesson over 2 lessons if need be, etc., etc. So that would be my best piece of advice. Use it flexibly, and if you've got any queries, we're genuinely here to help you out, really.
Great, thank you, Tony. So we've got a few minutes left. There is a Q&A box. I reckon you found it already. You've been making good use of it so far. I've been looking through, trying to answer some of the questions, as of my colleagues on the panel. So because obviously there's so many of you, and we're not in one place to be able to confer, we've been going through trying to answer the questions. We will answer all the questions afterwards. So feel free to add questions now in the last few minutes. Now, the other thing we'd like to do before the end, though, is to launch a survey. So, Joe, if you could launch the survey now for everybody, we'd just like to understand from all of you a little bit better what you're thinking at the moment, what you need, what you have been doing, what you're planning to do. So hopefully you can all see that a survey has just been launched. I'll come off mic and let you do the survey. Please keep asking questions for the next few minutes before we finish the session. And yeah, I'll just go back to flicking through the Q&A. But please do ask questions, fill in the survey, and we'll finish in a few minutes' time. Thank you.
Can I just say, I'm just looking at, there's a question that's come in about how the discover and think together questions are linked to the practice questions, and how they interweave. I think the answer is that, as maybe a rule of thumb, not every single lesson, but often think together 1 tends to be, then practice questions 1 and 2 tend to be quite like think together 1. Think together 2, practice question 3, maybe practice question 4, kind of linked to that, and then they go in a slightly different direction where they've got to think more independently, more creatively. But there is that kind of interweaving, so there is the opportunity to do that. I think that was a question from Sarah from one of the schools. So that's my answer to that question. I could just see coming in. And I think that maybe answers another question there about where you fit in the workbook compared with the think together. I'd make that choice based on what I thought would be how the questions fit together and where they need more practice. Maybe I'd write a couple more calculations on the board if I wanted them to do some extra ones, and so on and so on.
Joe, there was a question here about where the survey appears. Is it in a tab up the top of the screen, or is it appearing somewhere else for the participants? Okay, the answer to that is it should pop up on your home screen. I imagine that most of you have found it, but hopefully that helps anybody who is still looking for it. Somebody was asking about the slides, so I'll answer that one on the mic as well. You can download the slides from today from the home screen. Somebody's asking about, will we get further info on how to use the allocate function? I can share some help that we've already got on the Active Learn platform for doing this, but I'll also do a demo for the beginning of next term. Once the functionality is there and available to use, I'll do a demo so everyone can see and try it out for themselves. Okay, well, thanks for putting in your questions. We will answer them afterwards. We'll send round answers to your questions and also the recording of this session, so you can look back at everything. I think we're nigh on 4 o'clock, and I think you've probably had a few minutes to do the survey. So thank you very much for filling in the survey. Thanks for attending the session. Please do keep in touch with us about what you're doing with Power Maths, what you need, and we'll always do our best to give advice and react to what you need. As I say, it might be good for me to do another one of these in September, once the resources are up and it's easier to see all the things we're talking about, just to have a run through and a reminder. So thanks very much, everybody, for attending. Have a lovely evening. Have a really nice weekend.